Only here, on Earth, where food grew on its own, where air was just a byproduct of random untended plants, where resources lay thick on the ground, could a person actually choose not to do anything at all. There was enough extra created by those who felt the need to work, that the surplus could feed the rest. A world no longer of haves and have-nots, but of the engaged and the apathetic. Caliban's War, Book 2 of The Expanse. The future history of Earth and its society. The population of Earth was exploding, and each person consumed. This consumption required energy that produced waste. As more people were born, the demands on the planet became more and more strained. Pollution caused the climate to change, and the seas had begun to rise. By the end of the 21st century, the planet was at a tipping point where it could take no more. This was humanity at the precipice, on the brink of going out. The nations of the world had failed to address the crisis. In a desperate bid for the continued survival of humanity, all the Earth ceded their sovereignty to the United Nations, and a global government was formed to deal with the environmental threat. Policies were put into place to stop the environmental calamity that faced all of humanity. Due to the change in climate, most of the coastal cities were flooded, or partially flooded. Great sea walls were constructed to push the rising tides back from swallowing the remaining coastal cities. The old nations of the Earth as people once knew them were gone. Now, the planet was divided up into regional administrative zones by the UN. These regional zones were determined by the common interests of the people living in them. With Earth's exploding populations came the rise of the urban arcology movement, which attempted to deal with the problem of overpopulation by building great structures to house dense populations of people. The vast structures towered into the sky, or stretched out into the urban landscapes. The arcologies were designed to be their own self-sustaining ecosystems, and powered by their own fusion reactors. However, the technology of the day could not keep up with the ambition of the project, causing the urban arcology movement to crumble over time. Under the leadership of the UN, humanity had begun to colonize the solar system. First it was Luna, which used to be commonly called the Moon. They soon stretched out further and colonized Mars. However, due to the limits of starship engines of the day, humanity could go no further. Until the Martian scientist Solomon Epstein created the Epstein drive. With this new engine design, humanity was able to expand its way out to the ends of the solar system. By the 23rd century, Earth's capital was now New York City, and home to the government and military of the United Nations, with its elected commander-in-chief known as the Secretary General. With the Epstein drive technology, Earth's military, which was composed of the United Nations Navy and Marine Corps, this powerful military force spread throughout the solar system as they oversaw and guarded Earth's interests in the belt and outer planets, while also keeping the peace as part of Earth-Mars Coalition Navy. With 30 billion humans living on Earth and resources being scarce, only a limited number of jobs and education opportunities existed. As a result, society split into two kinds of groups: those who were employed and those who were not. Even with those that were employed, there was still a huge gap between those that worked and the mega wealthy, with the elites having their own personal security, so they never had to worry about mixing with anyone beneath them. The people who did work created enough excess through their wealth and purchasing power that the remaining who did not work could be provided for through a global welfare plan known as BASIC. These people had no money, and BASIC provided them with shared accommodations in government housing complexes, food in the form of gray-tasting protein with enhanced rice. Also, paper clothing was provided from kiosks with a thumb reader. They were also provided minimum health care from government-run clinics. These people were subject to mandatory contraception and could not legally have children. They were uneducated and contributed little to the global economy. However, they did have a bartering system among themselves known as a gray market. The UN provided uplift programs to help the unemployed get jobs. This was one of the only ways off of BASIC. The other was through education, but with so much competition it was fierce. A person needed 1 year's worth of work credits to show they were committed and had work ethic. Even then, the waiting lists for higher education could be as long as a decade. For the majority of humans that lived on BASIC, they would never know anything outside of their dreary existence on the global welfare program. Officially, there were two classes of people living on Earth: the employed and those who were not. However, unofficially, there was a third group known as the Unregistered, the shadowy characters who existed on the fringes of Earth society. They were made up of criminals, religious radicals, unlicensed children of the prostitution trade, or those who simply wanted to be forgotten. The Unregistered lived in the slums and the forgotten places, carving out a life for themselves through the black markets and crime. These people had no record of birth within the UN databases, so their actual numbers were unknown. At any time, any one of them could go on BASIC, but most of them chose not to. As hard as life was living in the cracks of society, they preferred it over a life on government assistance, for the freedoms that they normally would not have had living on global welfare. From time to time, regional governments conducted sweeps of government housing, low-income or high-crime rate neighborhoods, in search of unregistered people. Those found were forced into the system and put on BASIC. If they did not disclose their names, the state would then assign them one. With a population of 30 billion, having a child was no longer a human right as it once was. To curb the population, the UN had put in place a baby tax, which made it extremely expensive for people to have children. So people formed families made up of multiple couples that formed a civil union, and together they would split the tax burden and even shared their DNA for one child. As was the case with Captain James Holden of the Rosinante, whose parents were made up of 8 people, 5 fathers and 3 mothers, with his one mother Elsie, who was chosen to carry and give birth to him, where he was raised on a 22-acre family cooperative farm in Montana. Earth was the birthplace of humanity, and the people of Earth had spread out to the ends of the solar system. Earth still stood as the center of culture, economics, and politics, boasting some of the most powerful megacorporations in the system. Suffering with a massive population which was mostly unemployed, pollution, and climate change, Earth was dependent on the belt and outer planets for resources. But the power Earth once had on its colonies throughout the solar system was slipping away.